In this episode, we honor a man whose presence shaped not only the Anglican Church, but the very moral fabric of the Bahamas. Archbishop Drexel Wellington Gomez, scholar, teacher, bishop, and servant, gave his life to faith, leadership, and people. From the humble pews of St. Agnes to the highest seat in the province of the West Indies, he walked with purpose, guided by conviction and a deep belief in the power of service. In this episode, we pause to reflect, to remember, and to give thanks for a life that truly lived its faith. Born on January 24, 1937 in the Berry Islands, Drexel Wellington Gomez was a Bahamian boy with a curious mind and a heart drawn to faith. When his family moved to New Providence, young Drexel found himself at St. Agnes Anglican Church. Those experiences at St. Agnes would stay with him for the rest of his life, learning that ministry was not simply about words from a pulpit, but about drawing in the souls of a people. In 1955, he journeyed to Codrington College in Barbados, the oldest Anglican seminary in the Western Hemisphere, to prepare for the priesthood.
I got to Barbados, the hurricane came the day we left. We had to go to Jamaica and spend the night in Jamaica and then fly down the next morning. And that day the hurricane came and devastated Barbados. So when I arrived at the airport, there was hardly any airport. That was my first impression. It was a long ride to Codrington. And then the place itself. I believe that if you can't study at Codrington, you can't study anywhere in the world. It is situated on the two plantations were left to the college by Christopher Codrington. And Codrington is on the lower plantation called the college estate. And it's on the higher level where a church exists that was run by the Murfield fathers who took over Codrington the year that I entered Codrington. Was their first year in running Codrington. And a beautiful picturesque spot overlooking the Atlantic. And apart from the geography and the beauty of the landscape, it provided me with a place that encouraged study and reflection.
His intellect and humility set him apart. He earned a scholarship to St. Chad's College at Durham University in England, where he deepened his understanding of theology, history, and spiritual traditions that shaped his ministry.
In my second year, I was offered the possibility of sitting the the degree in theology at Codrington. They chose two of us, a student from Antigua and myself. They said that if you can pass the entrance exam, you would then go to Durham to do the other 2 years to the degree. I passed the exam, and both of us passed, and we went to England for the 2 years, and at Durham, and the Murfield fathers paid for everything. The transportation, they paid for the fees and all the costs of staying in St. Chad's College at Durham, which was the Anglo-Catholic college, just below, opposite the high altar of the cathedral. The 2 years in Durham itself taught me how to do theology and to sit at the feet of international scholars, two of whom I will mention in the service. Dr. Barrett, who was the first the senior New Testament lecturer and professor, and Charles Cranfield, who was my personal tutor, who wrote the international commentary on the Greek text of Romans. So I had the privilege of studying under international scholars, and it was not only a privilege, but it taught me how important theology is.
Father Gomez quickly distinguished himself as a scholar, teacher, and leader. To his students, he was a mentor who balanced intellect with empathy, always reminding them that true ministry begins with listening. In 1972, at just 35 years old, he was consecrated Bishop of Barbados, making him one of the youngest men ever to hold that position. In the 1980s, when the nation was wrestling with questions of integrity and the rise of drug trafficking, Archbishop Gomez was called to serve beyond the walls of the church. He became a member of the Commission of Inquiry into the impact of drug trafficking in the Bahamas. In 1996, after decades of service abroad, he returned home to assume a new mantle, Bishop of the Diocese of the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands. For many Bahamians, it felt like the return of a son. 2 years later, in 1998, his leadership reached its peak. He was elected Archbishop of the Church of the Province of the West Indies, becoming spiritual head of Anglicans across the Caribbean. In that role, Archbishop Gomez became both shepherd and statesman. He was a voice of reason within the global Anglican communion, respected internationally for his intellect and integrity. His work on the Windsor Report in 2003 addressed unity and doctrine within the worldwide church. He often spoke of home, of St. Agnes, and the community that first taught him to serve. When his years as Archbishop came to a close, he returned once again to the pews of St. Agnes, the church where it all began, back to serve his people. He would often lead Bible study. His voice was still steady. His message was still simple. Love God, love your neighbor, serve faithfully. And so the story of Drexel Gomez comes full circle. At St. Agnes, his presence was more than ceremonial. He was family, a constant, encouraging spirit whose wisdom would span generations. We spoke with a few members of St. Agnes's congregation, those who walked beside him, prayed with him, and saw firsthand the grace that defined his life.
I have all good memories from his humble beginnings, which he would tell you about. His favorite hymns, he had no problem trying to sing them at times, and his sense of family and the love he had for St. Agnes and its members. And there was no instance on a Wednesday Mass afternoon, for many years, that he would not say to the members, I just want the family and the members of St. Agnes Church to do the right thing, to praise God, serve him, and do the best that they can. And it was always about St. Agnes. St. Agnes was in his bones. He had favorite hymns that he would try to sing, a verse or two, but one particular was Hark My Soul, It Is the Lord. I can't remember 1 or 2 Bible study sessions that he would not remark on that, or even at the Wednesday Mass. His faithfulness can never be compared. Even pre-COVID, COVID, if he was required for some reason and an emergency, he would appear, he would attend. He never refused help, and his knowledge, my Lord, when I think the years that he would have been studying in Durham in England, one of the coldest places in the United Kingdom, I said, poor Bishop, poor Villegas, that's where they studied. And I could commiserate with them, but he took every opportunity to expound on biblical teachings. I'm not sure what computer was operating up there, but he had a memory like no one else that I can recall. And during Bible studies, because we continued them up to a few weeks before he took ill, he would say, I'm not too good at this. Can they scroll it up and I'll do with this? But when odd questions would be posed, the patience that he displayed to answer those questions and to clear up anything that the person asking the question would present with patience. And so Bible study could well go into half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour over, because he never hurried, he took his time. So his patience is incomparable.
I knew Archbishop Gomez for all of my life. Wonderful man. When we were growing up, we used to call him Drecky. I don't know if anybody heard that name before, but he loved this church. He loved his God, he loved his church, he loved his family, and he was a true Bahamian patriot. I remember him recounting that when he was baptized in the Berry Islands, that the priest said to his parents, this baby is going to be a priest. I think it was Father Henshaw, he said at the time. And he always talked about, with such love and reverence, about how things were when he was growing up here in St. Agnes Church. And he spoke very highly of Father Milton Cooper and the way he moved around the altar. And his father, Mr. Ruben Gomez, was the superintendent of a Sunday school at one time. So we were all very close. And he just loved this place, and he loved his God. And despite all of his many credentials, his high credentials and going all over the world, he never forgot where he came from and his St. Agnes roots. He loved this place.
I think you started to touch on it, but even upon his retirement, he came back and continued. Why was this church so important to him?
It was because I think he came to Nassau when he was 7 years old, and he grew up in the church. And like most of us who have moved out of the neighborhood now, once you grew up in St. Agnes Church, your heart is always there. His heart was always at St. Agnes, and once he retired and he came back home, as most of the other priests do, when they retire they go back to their home churches. But he played such an important part in this church all around. The Bible study group, that was going so well. He had a huge crowd that used to come out into Bible studies. Of course, after his illness, we started to do it via Zoom and all like that. But people don't know what he's done for a lot of other people quietly. My grandniece Alison wrote a beautiful tribute about him, and she's talked about the many hours she spent sitting around his dining room table, talking about things. And she said at one point she felt like she became his personal secretary because she wrote typed so many of his speeches and his teachings and all like that. And he was such a wonderful man. He got along with everybody, from the little children all the way up, and he was so friendly, and he had a beautiful sense of humor. Wonderful sense of humor.
Okay, I know that you had an opportunity to visit with the Archbishop on a regular basis. What did that entail, and what was it like for you personally?
It was a wonderful experience. I got to spend time with him every day. Ken Davies and we would do evening prayer with him. And before I was ordained, he was still able to speak a little bit, so he would talk to me about my experiences at Cartwright College. He would talk about philosophy and theology. And even while I was in seminary, I would always call him, and he would always give me advice. And what is Old Testament, Pauline studies, or systematic theology, Archbishop had an answer, and he just had so much information, so much knowledge. He was a true scholar, and it was just wonderful to sit at his feet, and as a deacon here at St. Agnes, to minister to him up until his last days. So it was just remarkable to just learn from him, to pray with him, to hold his hand, and just to tell him that I love you and we appreciate you for your service and your contributions to theology, to the church, and to the wider Bahamian community.
He meant a lot to this church, and I know that you have not been here as long, but from what you've been able to see and experience, what has he meant to the congregation? What does he mean to the congregation of St. Agnes?
Well, everyone in St. Agnes loves Archbishop, and no matter what question you have, is it about politics, about anything on the Bible, Archbishop, he just had so much information. He just knew the answer to so much things, and he was friendly and loving to all. You know, he would talk and play with the children. He would just get along with everyone. He just exemplified a good priest to all. And so that, you know, we'll greatly miss him here at St. Agnes, and everyone has their own experiences of him. But as it relates to the parish, everyone is going to miss Archbishop. You know, people would come from all around to his Bible study, log in from around the world, just to hear his insight on so much matters, and his theological knowledge was just profound.
What was it like to serve with him and watch his leadership firsthand? After the break, we find out. Stay with us. More on The Record right after this. We stayed a bit longer at St. Agnes to speak with one person, Archdeacon Keith Cartwright, rector of the parish. He shared how the Archbishop poured into the community at large.
Well, first of all, Archbishop Gomez was an extraordinary bishop in the Diocese of the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands. He was our second bishop, Bahamian bishop of the diocese, after Bishop Michael Eldon, who was a legend in himself. But he was a very, very keen academic, and he always was able to point to all the challenges that we were having in our community and put a sound theological basis on what's happening and how we should improve our situation. He was prophetic in the sense that he always, if he saw something going astray, he had the courage to speak out. And he had the courage to say, hey, guys, something is wrong. We got to fix this. And here are some of the suggestions that I would like to offer. And that was his legendary status as a bishop. In Barbados for over 20 years, and here in the Bahamas for those many years here. Always willing to stand up and be counted for what he felt was the right way. And that sometimes crossed some of his very close friends, some of his close associates, and some of his close groups in the Bahamas, but they had to respect him. And that was what I felt. But over and above that, he had a tremendous gift with administration. And so he was able to pull the organization together and streamline it, make sure it ran efficiently. And I think those are some of the lessons we could really take from his tenure as the bishop and as the archbishop. Always proactive, always looking forward, always making sure that all the ducks lined up and everything was running efficiently.
One of the things that I found remarkable with him was watching him, for instance, navigate the Commission of Inquiry in the 80s. A very difficult time in country, but still being able to be that priest and that theologian. And a lot of clergymen can't do that, but he somehow was able to manage that.
Oh yes. Well, again, it was a very trying time for us as a country in the Bahamas, with the onslaught of the drug trafficking through the country. It's sort of bringing its ugly head back again. But in those days, it was really, 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 really a very difficult time. And he had been in Barbados for so many years then, and he was invited to come back to serve as a person on the commission. And when he looked at the evidence before him, he commented really to say, well, you know, we don't have direct evidence on X, Y, and Z, but certainly the drug money, and I'm just paraphrasing it, infiltrated itself in every fiber of the Bahamian society and produced negative results. People looking the other way instead of doing their job, persons who were given the right to lead were not doing so because maybe, you know, I may upset some people with all of this money. And so he really stood out. And his other persons on the commission weren't prepared to do that. But he was the only Bahamian on the commission. And he loved this country so much. And so he wanted to make sure that there was a voice to say, listen, fellas, we got to do better. And he included himself in that as well, and challenged all of us to say, look, you just can't turn a blind eye. Let's stand for the right. And so that's what, as a young man, I took away from the Commission of Inquiry and his role in that. Being the only Bahamian, a very qualified Bahamian, very intelligent Bahamian, looking at what he heard and what he saw and saying, look, something is just not right here.
Even as Archbishop, he was in the center of many global issues, even during the split between the global church and the American church. It took center stage in that and during that period. And yet, again, for me, still maintaining what many of us saw as, the ministry that was needed at home. But what was it like having a Bahamian, an archbishop, now at the center of a global controversy in the church?
Well, he was the first Bahamian ever to be Archbishop of the West Indies. We had Jamaicans, Barbadians, Guyanese, so on and so forth, but never Bahamian. And so when he was elected, it was a historic day for us in the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands. And then what made it so remarkable was his leadership in the province. He was, for many years, was the secretary to each of the archbishops before him, and he worked very hard behind the scenes, making it all happen. So it was a natural progression for him to be elevated to Archbishop. And when he became Archbishop and was in charge, then he blossomed. And so we were able to bring Anglicans from throughout the Caribbean together, and two very beautiful congresses where we had hundreds of Anglicans, young people, middle-aged people, more mature people coming together in different ministries and looking at the church, where it has come from, where it is, how it should progress, living together for a week and really trying to steer the church forward. So that was a tremendous legacy. But then the Archbishop of Canterbury saw this tremendous gift and talent that he had, because he was extremely friendly and involved with the bishops in North America, and extremely involved with all of the bishops in the global south, particularly Africa and the southern Americas. And that was because of his interaction in all the different committees and so on. But the Archbishop leaned on him. The Archbishop of Canterbury leaned on him to try to bridge that divide that erupted as a result of the ordination of women and same-sex marriages. And so he really tried his best and succeeded to a great extent to keep everybody together. Now that he's gone, now that we have a female Archbishop of Canterbury, things have tended to erupt again. But there's no Drexel Gomez on the scene who has that gift of being so involved with the bishops in North America, in Europe, and throughout the world. He was well respected. And that was because of his keen intellect. He was able to speak to them. And this was a fellow who never got a doctorate. He just did his bachelor's. But there was no doctorate person around there who could keep up with Drexel and his intellect and tremendous theological acumen. And so we will miss him globally. And that speaks well for the Bahamas. As a small country, a fellow from Licton, Waikiki, his daddy was from, and of course he was born in Bullock's Harbor, but then coming to St. Agnes with his mom and dad through McCullough Corner at age 7, growing up around here with the legends like Willie Thompson and Dudley Strawn, Gilbert Thompson, and just doing so well under the guidance of Milton Cooper, the first black Bahamian priest here at St. Agnes, and they made him proud. And when you look at the ministries of all of those priests from St. Agnes in those days, we can't touch their little toe.
Final question. St. Agnes was obviously his home growing up. But upon his retirement, having done all that he did, he continued to make this church his home. This service on Wednesday, even Bible study, he made that a priority for his ministry, his life, his work. What did he mean for this church and congregation?
He was the elder statesman, if I could put it like that. But he always said to me, he said, "Keith, I owe everything to St. Agnes. I owe everything to St. Agnes." And when I retired as the Archbishop and the Bishop, I decided, after prayerful consideration, because I could have gone, he said I could have done many things, but I decided that whatever number of years I had left, I wanted to give back to the church that made me everything. And so he came here in Archdeacon Ranfley Brown's time, and of course he was like a son to him. And then he just threw himself into the main core ministries here at the church. His Bible studies were legendary. I don't think we have anybody who conducts Bible studies like Drexel Wellington Gomez. Detailed, notes every time, you explaining everything. It was legendary. And here at St. Agnes, I don't know how we're going to even try to get back to some semblance of that standard, but it was legendary. And then he said to me, when I came back as rector, he said, "Keith, I would like to continue with the ministry to the more mature persons who I could relate to as well." And so he established a 12:30 service on a Wednesday, and it just grew. And people came out, and he had that as his little baby. And so we're going to miss him at the 12:30 time. We have Father Bethel and Deacon Nottage here, along with myself. I take the early morning services, but I am allowing them to do the 12:30 in place of Archbishop Gomez. But nobody had that kind of zeal for that. And he would be right here, and then after the service, he'd spend time with those persons, chatting with them, encouraging them. And then he had a tremendous zeal for being a parish priest. Even though he was a bishop and an administrator, he loved just to be a simple pastor. And so if there were persons that had difficulties, he will call me, we'll talk about it. I say, "Well, now you want to go back or you want me to go?" We'll share that ministry, caring about people. And then, of course, whenever he saw some things in me that perhaps he felt he should speak, he said, "Keith, now come, let's talk about this. What do you think about this?" And it'll click on, okay, I get it. I got to do better here. And then there were things that, particularly in terms of writing papers on dissertations on certain things, I'd sit down and talk with him about. Tremendous insight. So he had a tremendous positive effect on St. Agnes, and we're going to deeply miss him.
Well, we've heard how the Archbishop led his flock and shaped generations of clergy, but who was he away from the pulpit? When we return, we sit down with his son, Attorney Damien Gomez, KC. Stay with us. You're watching On the Record. And we close tonight with someone who knew Archbishop Gomez best, his son, Attorney Damien Gomez, KC. Firstly, sir, our condolences to you and your family on the passing of the Archbishop.
Well, thank you very much.
So let's start with, I guess, what is your earliest memory of your father, both as a parent and priest?
I remember him in church.
Ah, even as a child?
As a parish priest, we lived next door to the church that he would have been assigned to. So I remember walking around the altar and trying to emulate him.
How would you say that his faith even shaped home life?
It was a big part of who we were. Daddy was deeply involved in the production of our regional Book of Common Prayer. And he would test out the liturgies with us.
Test them with you?
Well, we would, in the evenings, go over the different types of services, and at the end of the week he'd say, well, which one did you prefer? And then why? And just to get her reaction.
Was it a strict home life? I ask that because I know the children of priests, and I always get varying answers on what.
No, my father was a disciplinarian in the sense that he expected us to do our homework, and unlike most, all the rectories had an office for the priests, and our homework table was in his office.
So there was no escaping.
So no escaping.
Wow. Many saw him as a man. He was a great disciple. How did that even extend into family life?
Well, he had a habit on Sundays when we had lunch of asking us about what he had said in the sermon. And it wasn't that we went to sleep while he was preaching, but it was impactful because you learned without even trying how to listen and how to understand, how to summarize, and to get to the heart of whatever the sermon was about. And as I got older, when I got my driver's license, I had to drive him to church for Sunday services. And as bishop, he would start at 7 o'clock Mass in the morning. Then he would have 9 o'clock Mass, 11 o'clock Mass, and then evensong at 7.
And you had to drive.
And I drove
to
all of these. Yeah. So, and each of Daddy's sermons were different.
On every Sunday, at every service.
At every service. So lunch was, full of discussion
on the
various sermons that he had given.
And that's interesting. What were the preparations like, though, if you're talking
Daddy
about
would start,
7, 9, 11, and evensong?
Daddy would start preparing his sermons from about Thursday. And by Saturday evening, he would have them in separate files. And he was always very prepared.
What, and we're going to move on to some of his work in the church, but what lessons would you say that he emphasized most to you and your siblings?
Whatever is worth doing is worth doing well.
At what point did you start to realize and see the impact of his influence in the regional church, firstly, and then later on in the global church?
My mother often used to say to us after Daddy would have received a call from whoever the bishop was when he was a priest, brace yourself. When your dad comes back, we probably have to move. I went to 13 separate primary schools.
Wow.
Because whenever the bishop called, Daddy was obedient, and he did whatever he was asked to do.
Why was he called to go so many different places? Did he ever say why? Did he ever discuss
Well,
why?
it was the church, particularly, well, the English-speaking church was evolving from having predominantly white English priests to people who look like us. And it was an enormous responsibility for priests of that generation to do what was necessary to prepare the church for us taking over. And Bishop Markham took an interest in my father. And Daddy's exposure, after he had left Government High, he worked in the Treasury for, I think, about 3 years, because he had graduated at 15. In those days, the age of majority was 21. So he couldn't travel to get to Quadrington College until after he'd finished attaining the age of 18. And then my grandfather knew a former teacher who was from Barbados and asked him to be Daddy's guardian. He's now 18.
And you need a guardian.
So it sounds crazy, but the age of majority was 21.
Sure.
So, and that was Frederick Smith. He later became Justice of Appeal, Frederick Smith here. And Uncle Fred was good to us. He was a good friend.
So it would seem that Bishop Markham recognized something in your father from a very young age, moved him from parish to parish. That experience and those experiences eventually propelling him to bishop.
Yeah, he actually was, at his ordination as bishop, the youngest bishop within the Anglican community globally. And that in itself is an achievement. And he was picked because he was administratively very efficient. And he acted as the bishop's secretary to Bishop Markham. And at that time, Bishop Markham was essentially preparing the cadre of people like Bishop Eldon and my father, William Thompson, who was later murdered. The church was being particularly equipped with talent that was scarce.
He called it, I remember in an interview with me, he called it indigenizing the church.
Well, that's
and it was a very deliberate effort. Himself and others were being put in these positions.
And it was important. We had the benefit of Bishop Knowles, who had been bishop in Antigua. He retired, and he participated in that indigenization process.
Another Bahamian who
Yes.
went off to be Bishop Elder, but certainly had his roots in the Bahamas.
Well, he was a Bahamian.
Yeah,
I mean, he was a white Bahamian, but he was a Bahamian
nonetheless a
nonetheless.
Bahamian. Yeah. Your father became the Bishop of Barbados, but always kept a connection to the Bahamas.
Well, we were part of a regional movement, deliberately seeking to keep the standards of the church at the highest levels. So his going to Barbados was not as if he were going to Timbuktu. He had already studied there at Codrington College.
He knew the people.
He knew the people, and quite frankly, if you look at some of the street names in the corners off East Street, you see evidence of Barbadian contributions to our community. So we culturally, we were very similar.
He is eventually elevated to Archbishop of the province of the West Indies. He takes over from Bishop Eldon upon his retirement as Bishop of the Bahamas, and is elevated to Archbishop of the province of the West Indies, the first time a Bahamian has been elevated to this post. What did that mean for him? Did he ever speak to you about, or speak to the family about, that responsibility and the weight of the responsibility?
Well, in our church, the House of Bishops meets, and the House of Bishops is like a cabinet. So when you're Archbishop, you're just the first amongst equals. What it meant for him was it was a crowning of the work that he had been doing in ensuring that regionally we had the proper structures in place. So, for instance, when Uncle Orland was Archbishop, Daddy was his right-hand person, and they would meet. Even though he was in Antigua, either he would come to Barbados or Daddy would go to Antigua. And whenever they met in Barbados, we would know because he would stay with us. So you could see firsthand what was happening. Prior to Uncle Orland, there was no place where data belonging to the church was actually stored. And it was Daddy who set up the secretariat and formalized it when he became Archbishop. Because previously, if you had a death within the House of Bishops, the information that the deceased bishop had, there was a danger that it died with him.
Wow.
So what we set about to do was to put in the organizational structures that enables someone who comes 100 years from now to say, this is what these men talked about at this meeting on this particular date. And this reflects their position at Lambeth or wherever.
Aside from his elevation within the church and the global communion, he was well known, not just in the region, but globally. He also used every opportunity and on many occasions took the public spotlight, whether it was on some commission he was on or some task force he was on, and was always very outspoken on a number of issues. I recalled even in the 80s when he sat on the Commission of Inquiry. And he never shied away from those opportunities to speak up and to speak out. What were those occasions like for him, even when what he was saying was not popular?
Well, he was loyal to Christ.
End of story.
The end of story.
And he never wavered. He always spoke. And people did not. He told me in an interview that people would often call him and express their displeasure with what he had to say.
But as I said, his focus was, what would Christ have me do?
Was that a difficult time for family, or he just soldiered on?
Daddy was the head of our family, and our loyalty was to him. Mm-hmm. So whatever position he took, he had our support.
Interesting. Also in the global church, he was very much revered for his positions, even being, called to the Lambeth Conference and leading that in London, but a very close connection with the global church.
Very, very close relations with the global church, both the global north and the global south. He was an organizer in the global south and a critical spokesperson who demonstrated through the programs that we were able to see succeed in the English-speaking region of quickly ensuring that every parish had a qualified priest who had studied theology and who had rigorously gone through a process of training. And to make matters even better for my father, being the head of the diocese in which Codrington College existed, he actually taught. So during his tenure, he would have had the opportunity to train every single priest who graduated from Codrington. He would have marked their papers, he would have attended to preparing for tutorials, and he would have helped.
That's a significant achievement. We're just about out of time for the segment. So I want to end off by asking you, in your opinion, I mean, despite all that he has achieved and what he has done for the church, locally, regionally, and globally, what to you will be or is his crowning legacy? What is the thing that stands out to you as his legacy?
I didn't quite understand when he chose to retire at 70, why he had made the decision. When he had been ordained.
At 70, you didn't understand the decision for him?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No. up until then, persons who had been ordained at the time that he had been ordained did not have a retirement age. And the thought was that you, when Christ is ready for you to retire,
Called you home.
he'll call you home. You know, and he not only retired, but he discussed his retirement with some of the older bishops who were in set with him. One of them said, Drexel, why are you doing this? You don't need to. And Daddy says, you know, we need to make room for these people that we have been training to lead. And he then decided he would go on the day that my father retired. And he did retire when Daddy retired. And then Daddy goes into parish life at St. Agnes, which is his home church. And I passed by the house, and he was busy reading different texts. So I asked him what was going on. He says, well, I'm starting a Bible study group, and I want them to read these things in preparation for our meeting. We're going to meet once a week. Within about half a year, they were meeting twice a week. And the group had become so big that they had to split up to have meetings on separate days to accommodate the size of the group. And they ended up being the largest Bible study group in the region. And it's not just St. Agnes members. You had Anglicans from every corner of New Providence attending. And then we had, in addition to that, persons who are Baptists joining in and coming. So it was a powerful display.
I asked you that question, not quite sure. I wasn't quite sure what it would be until you said it, because I think for so many people, having him do that really helped them to understand the Bible and the Word of God and teachings, and it was extremely popular. And as we wrap up, I'll tell you this joke. Every time he saw me in church on Sunday, he'd say, I haven't seen you to Bible study. And I said, well, Archbishop, I work, and time you have. And he'd look at me and say, I'll continue to pray for your immortal soul. That was his way of telling me, you need to attend. But it was very important to him to do that, and it's interesting that you said that, yeah.
Part of his philosophical position was that at the heart of any religious problem is the interpretation and application of the Bible to the solution. And that, he lived it.
Yes. Damien, that brings us really to the end of our interview for this segment. But thank you so much. Again, our continued condolences. And thank you for sharing this insight. For those of us who knew him, you knew the public-facing side of him. You knew him, in his role at church. But you shared a lot of insight into other things we never knew. And so thank you so very much for sharing that.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, all right. So we'll a few closing words and remarks right after this break as we wrap up this most special show for us tonight. As we remember Archbishop Drexel Gomez, not just as a bishop or scholar, but as a father, mentor, and servant of God. His legacy is woven into Bahamian faith in every sermon, every soul guided, and every life touched by his compassion and conviction. To our guests and all who shared stories, we say thank you. And to you, our audience, may we each take from his life the courage to serve, the wisdom to lead, and the grace to love. I'm Jerome Sawyer. Thank you for watching us here on the Record. We'll see you next time.